Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing your time to do something else, so we are appreciative that you're taking that time to spend with us. As always, if this information is valuable and you find it to be enlightening and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. That way you will be notified when each episode is released. And we put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then you can also, we also put out a video on YouTube every Wednesday as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. In addition, as asked before, and I'll probably do this every couple of podcasts if you can, when you're listening to our podcast, if you can kind of give us a rating, it'd be greatly appreciated. It helps our distributors kind of gauge who is listening and reacting to the podcast, and then it allows us to gain a little bit more reach and be distributed to new audiences. But in any event, as always, welcome and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I want to get into the topic of sports gambling. And I want to cover a few aspects of this. I want to first, of course, talk about sports gambling in general, talk about the revenue that's being made as a result of this, why sports gambling is even legal here in the United States. And again, I'm covering here in the United States. And I also want to talk about the addiction that is becoming more rampant in the United States from sports gambling and what that is doing in terms of finances here for many Americans who participate or at least have become addicted to sports gambling. So that's what I want to kind of talk about today. I want to talk about sports gambling here in the United States and its effects. And I guess in order to start, I probably should give a little bit of background, just a little bit of background about sports betting here in the United States. So prior to 2018, sports betting in the United States was only legal in the state of Nevada. And there was a ruling called the U.S. Supreme Court made a ruling on what was called then the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, better known as PASPA. And basically that act had prohibited states from authorizing or regulating sports gambling. After the Supreme Court struck that down in 2018, they basically opened up the floodgates and they said that sports gambling, or at least states, now had the right to have legalized sports gambling in their states, because prior to 2018, the only state that legally, and that's the key word, legally could allow sports betting was Nevada. After 2018, up until this point, you now have 38 states that have some form of legal gambling in their states. I set that up as the backdrop because that brings us to where we are currently at today. And I've talked about this before. I've talked about sports betting before, especially I know I did a podcast a couple of years back where I talked about the addiction and how it was occurring in young people, because sports betting is very much targeted towards young people a lot more impulsive, things of that nature. Matter of fact, I'll post that um, podcast somewhere in the YouTube, and also you can check it out on any of the podcast platforms where I talked about teen gambling addiction. But I set that as the backdrop because that now brings us to where we're at today, where you now have gambling addiction becoming a serious issue here in the United States. But most of it, a lot of this is underreported. Like you can use that as opinion or fact. It's underreported because there's so much money being made from sports betting here in the United States. I was reading an article from ESPN where they were talking about this very thing. They talked about the record amount of money that was made in 2024. Because keep in mind, here in the United States, we're coming off of the Super Bowl, which is the largest sports event in the United States, and there was a tremendous amount of betting that took place on that, especially online sports betting and sports betting in general. And so now that that's over, a lot of the numbers for 2024 are now being generated, and ESPN reported this in a recent article. So in this article, they stated here that the American sports betting industry posted a record 13 point 13.71 billion dollars in revenue in 2024, and that was up from the $11 billion that was recorded in 2023.
Men lie, women lie. The numbers don't.
It goes on to say that the American Gaming Association, the AGA, recently had an industry call, and they said that legal sports books took in nearly $150 billion worth of bets, and that was an increase of 22% from 2023. I give you all of that information because as I get into the addiction and how sports betting is beginning to take an effect on household wealth in the United States, these numbers that I'm reporting are part of the justification or the reasoning, in my opinion, of why the problem of sports betting is so underreported. Now, again, there's been plenty of small news story hits. There's a couple of low viewing documentaries here and there online and news stories, but this is a major problem, and it definitely needs to have light shed on it. In addition, we are about to come up on another big sporting event or sports betting period in the United States, which is the NCAA basketball tournament. In the United States, you basically have 3 periods during the year where there's a tremendous amount of betting that goes on in sports betting. You have the Super Bowl, which we just had. You have the NCAA tournament coming up, and then typically in October, which is one of the biggest months, you have all 4 sports leagues that are kind of going at the same time. You have basketball that typically starts in October. You have hockey that starts in October. I think it starts in September, but the season obviously is going on in October. You have the football season, the National Football League, and then you also have typically the baseball season, especially the playoffs and the World Series. So 3 different periods during the year see some of the biggest sports betting, but we're about to come up on that. So this is definitely another reason why I want to talk about that. In addition, March is now known, or I should say not now known, but I guess there's been a lot of push to make March known as Problem Gambling Awareness Month. And this is something that's, being promoted by the National Council on Problem Gambling, where they talk about, some of the problems that have come about as a result of sports betting. But getting back to the numbers, so I gave you what those numbers are. When you start to break those numbers down, right, you say $13 billion. Wow, that's a lot of money. Well, where is that money going to? Well, that money amongst those 38 states is being converted into tax revenue.
I ain't passed the ball, but I know a little bit.
And I was reading an article here from Sportsbook Review where they broke down the very number that I'm talking about. So as I reported in that ESPN piece, $13 billion was generated in betting revenue in 2024, right? Based on this article here from Sportsbook Review, where they basically have, they're providing tracking betting data, market data for 2025. Out of that $13 billion that was generated in revenue, almost $3 billion of that money was converted into tax revenue for the states. And at 2.7 billion, if you want to be technical. And these states are collecting big amount of money. Matter of fact, New York, the state of New York, actually is number one in terms of the amount of revenue that was generated from sports betting and also the amount of taxes that was generated. In this same report from Sportsbook Review, it says that out of that $2 billion, New York State generated almost $1 billion in tax revenue from sports betting. Now, there are those that argue, as I said early in the beginning, and they'll say, well, it's entertainment and people should have the right to choose what can be entertaining for them. The problem is that sports betting has tremendous consequences that come along with it. Matter of fact, as I stated, sports betting addiction is a worldwide phenomenon. But here in the United States, it's increasingly getting worse. And this was recently covered in a story that was done by CBS 4 in Miami. They talked about the sports betting addiction problem that's occurring in South Florida. And in this piece, they interviewed a gentleman who talked about his addiction. I want to play this and then talk a little bit about how this is affecting the finances of people here in the United States, and then I'll close out from there. So let me play this from CBS 4 in Miami, talking about sports addiction in South Florida.
I love the rush of winning a bet, losing a bet.
As he entered his teen years in college in New York, he turned to placing bets online with bookies. By the time he turned 21, he had already dropped out of college. A new world had opened up. Legal online sports betting.
Placed 40, 50, 60 bets daily before. Wake up in the morning, there's, tennis on in China, and then, you got soccer in the morning in Europe, and then you got college football or college basketball in the day.
How much money were you wagering on these 40, 50, 60 bets a day?
A couple hundred.
Total?
Yeah. No, a couple hundred each bet.
Each bet?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Now, and again, that's from CBS 4 in Miami. Couple of hundred each bet. And as he stated in that piece there, he's not just betting on football or basketball. He's betting on tennis, soccer, anything that's accessible on these apps. He is betting on it. And at $200 a bet, if you bet on 4 sports in one day, that's $800. And if you obviously you can times that, by 5 days a week, 7 days a week, you're talking about thousands of dollars a week and even more a month, that people are basically losing, right, because of this addiction. When we start talking about some of the numbers, and I'll just tell you right now, as you research this, you're going to pull up articles that say, no, it's not an addiction. It's a small amount of people. It's overblown. And a lot of this, as I said earlier, is purposely suppressed, or at least presented to be harmless, because there's so much money involved. There was a study that was done by the University of Southern California. They had some researchers that put out a paper back in October of 2024, researchers from the Marshall School of Business. And in this research paper, they targeted the 38 states, or at least they looked at the 38 states that currently have legal sports betting. And in that paper, they looked at various categories of financial health for individuals in those states that were participating in sports betting. They looked at areas such as credit score. They looked at areas such as bankruptcies, collections, credit card delinquencies, auto loans. It goes on and on and on. And of course, I will post this in the video for those who want to look at this. But one of the categories that they looked at here, which I thought was very interesting, was not only credit score, but also access to credit. What they said here is that because of the because so many banks are seeing an increase in credit card balances increasing, specifically when you start looking at states where sports betting is legal, some credit card companies are now beginning to restrict access to credit. And even in some cases, they're beginning to lower limits for credit card access or credit card balances, because they're trying to mitigate, the amount of exposure that they have, because so many people are using credit cards to place these bets. Because when you go on these apps, one of the first things that they ask for is a form of payment. And typically that form of payment for many people is either a debit card or a credit card. But in this study, again, they show what the effects have been, and everything from credit card delinquency to increase in collections, bankruptcy bankruptcy filings have been up. It says here, 3 to 4 years after legalization of sports gambling, we observed that the likelihood of bankruptcy filings increases by as much as 25 to 30% when compared to pre-treatment levels. And it's a very detailed piece of research. If you're interested, again, I'll post this. But the overall message here is that sports gambling and sports gambling addiction is real. This is not made up. This is not some, fantasy. There are people who are not only struggling with addiction, but are destroying their financial statuses and, of course, their family statuses. And, this topic needs to be highlighted. It needs to be amplified. And, much more regulation needs to be set to restrict people from basically risk losing their livelihoods, or even their financial standings, or even worse, their families and their lives. Um, and for those who are struggling with addiction, or if you need help, you can definitely again go to the National Problem Gambling Helpline, which is 1-800-GAMBLER. That number is actually 1-800-426-2537. Again, 1-800 426-2537, and that's the National Problem Gambling Helpline. And when you call that number, there would be somebody that can at least either assist you or give you the information that you need to get in contact with someone that can help or assist, for those who are struggling with addiction, or if you yourself are struggling with addiction. So we can start from there. But yeah, this is a serious problem, and I wanted to get the attention that it deserves. Again, March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. The hashtag is PGAM 2025. So if you retweet this podcast and this video, or you want to send out some information yourself, put that hashtag on there as well. So there can be a tremendous amount of awareness brought to this issue. But that's my time for today. Again, if you want to leave a comment, you want to contact us, you can reach me at the People's Voice Podcast on all, the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram, or you can reach me at I am Trey Evans on all social media platforms. And in addition, of course, you can leave a comment on the YouTube page, and of course, I will follow up and get back to you. But that's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.